the heart of the entire Trump administration, which is and on the one hand, an absolute bald, audacious willingness to lie about anything, to even lie in the face of knowing that you're going to be caught
Right.
lying.
Lying in the face of video evidence that we see is not what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
I mean, it's just I can't I find it almost inexpressible in its um in the transparent view into this administration and into what these people are thinking. And the other aspect of it is their rank, utter, astounding incompetence.
Mhm.
So this whole thing about the Defense Department giving this anti-laser drone fighter to Homeland Security, who then gives it to Customs and the Customs and Border people, in the face of the FAA saying, "Don't do this. This is dangerous."
And this
We
is to
have
fight the cartels, right? That is some kind of laser.
theoretically, who knows? I mean, it also sounds like little boys with a weapon. We want it. We want it. Well, who's going to do it? Who's going to fire it? We want to fire it. And the FAA saying, no, there are airplanes up there. This is dangerous. And the Defense, Homeland, Customs and Border people then utterly ignoring the FAA, taking this weapon, firing it anyway, not at a drone, it turns out, but at a balloon. The FAA freaking out and then closing the airspace for 10 days. Then the White House saying, no, it was a drone invasion from the cartels, and that lie will be exploded within minutes. And then ordering the FAA to reopen the airports. And we still don't know if this is safe, whose hand the anti-laser drone is now lies. Who's holding it? When will it be fired again? Will it be fired again?
And this pictures, two old Fox hosts together, Sean Duffy in charge of transport and Pete Hegseth in charge of the Department of Defense /War, two people that may have been fine as weekend co-hosts, but have no business running a government department. No business. Sean Duffy, whose loudest proclamation has been that we should all dress up when we fly.
Right, but they're on opposite sides now, which is that other interesting thing, which it seems logical that we could look forward to, and perhaps it is happening now, of the people inside of the Trump administration whose whole point in life is merely to be loyal to Donald Trump, now find themselves at odds with each other. That's when things really start to fall apart.
Oh, goodness. And meanwhile, we've got Don Lemon, who, again, they've lied about why he was arrested.
No, another good example. We have these lies. We have the lies in Minneapolis, bald lies and lies that were almost immediately proved to be lies. Then Don Lemon gets arrested. Everybody in the White House is cheering, make lemons from lemonade or whatever they were saying. And then there's now video evidence of that. No, they lied about that. That's going to be there. So that will be thrown out. And all they will have accomplished is to elevate Don Lemon in his new social media life.
Right. And then we've got, I was lying in my hospital bed going over all the things that have not been resolved. So the East Wing not been resolved. Kennedy Center, is it ever going to come back?
No, there's new plans that were just released on the East Wing.
Oh, really?
Which you should look at. And it's, the East Wing will overshadow in every respect the White House itself. Will block the White House from view. It is as bad as it could possibly be, as vulgar as it could possibly be, as inappropriate as it could possibly be, as dumbass as it could possibly be.
And I wonder if the next president, depending on who she or he is, takes it down.
Well, you can't. I mean, that's what Donald Trump is counts on here. You can't. You build these things. Donald Trump has built a lot of rotten buildings in New York that are still there, decaying. Nobody takes them down. And again, it's like that the Kennedy Center thing, as we've discussed. You remake these things, you tear them down, you remake it, and it's just, you can't remember what was there before.
Right, what was there before.
I mean, the past is very fragile, and you wipe it away, it doesn't come back.
Right. I was also remembering his story that his uncle taught the Unabomber, which just came out of nowhere. I mean, and he said, "Oh yeah, my uncle, very smart guy, used to teach the Unabomber." And what's going on inside Trump's head that he comes up with these stories? And I understand exaggerating when you're a teenager, or even maybe when you're in your 20s and you're trying to impress someone. But when you're the president of the United States, A, you shouldn't have to try and impress anybody, and B, you're going to be caught out. And the sort of brazenness of it, the terrible birthday parade.
Again, but this is the point, and it's the serious point, and it's the point that nobody can quite get their heads around. This willingness to remake reality and then to insist upon it, and not in any way to be caught out having done it. The election was stolen from him. Well, we know that it wasn't stolen from him. We know he didn't win. Everybody knows. Literally everybody, but possibly this one person, knows that he lost the 2020 election. But no, I mean, and it's either this remarkable ability to stay in character, or he's a crazy man. I mean, he has departed from reality.
Yeah, and Tulsi Gabbard is supporting him in that. And then we had the paving over of the Rose Garden.
But that's one of the interesting things. She is not. She knows. I mean,
she knows that they lost the election, but she's going through the motions.
All of these people who say this, they know. They're perfectly well aware.
Which makes it even worse. And it's all his failed investigations against James Comey, against Tish James. I mean, it's just, the incompetence is staggering. It's staggering.
Without question. But the larger question is, does the incompetence have a purpose? So it is incompetent to say, prosecute these enemies when with any reasonable thought you would understand that these prosecutions are not going to go forward. They are going to be thrown out in court. But what is the effect anyway of even insisting that this administration, and then taking the steps to prosecute these people? Well, obviously fear, obviously, and this other sense of the world divides between Donald Trump and the people who are not on his side. So he makes this is the thematic point of this administration over and over and over again. And this willingness, this all or nothing sense. I am going to do it, and I am willing to risk everything to do it, to be the guy who comes out to break the establishment or be broken by it. And that is still the thing, the stakes that are going on here and going on now into this election year. I mean, this is again very real. He creates this existential structure that he understands that in order for him to succeed, everybody else must be defeated. Everybody else must die. And He understands how high the stakes are, because if he doesn't succeed, he's going to die. So
Right.
this is a I mean, we are in this all or nothing, a radical, dangerous, mortal condition.
Radical, dangerous, mortal condition.
Epstein had them all in his web. I mean, you know, apparently he had a mole in the police in the police department as well. I mean, everybody was there were always people who were on his payroll. I hadn't read that particular exchange, but it is extremely chilling. And was there any explanation there for why they wanted to, quote, take the easy way out?
Absolutely not. The response was, our position is the investigation is still open and pending. Right. And this person wrote back, how is it pending? And there it runs out. And as we know, of course, there are 3 million unpublished Epstein files. So is the answer hidden there? We don't know. But I think what it speaks to is this incredible barrier that you were able to overcome to get that story published, and the fear and the institutional cover-up that you came up against.
Well, I mean, there's nothing like being sort of, you know, aggressive and ignorant at the same time. I mean, it's like at that point, Jeffrey Epstein was not this kind of mythic demon that he is now, right? I mean, I had met him, in a reception for one of the first Clinton initiative reception in 2005, and briefly, and he was just one of those rich guys, percolating around, and who was sort of on the fringes of sort of the action, really. I mean, not an outsider, but someone who certainly wasn't a major figure. This is no like Jamie Dimon or someone. He was just a kind of slightly a bit of a kind of user, clearly, and operator. He had these dead eyes that I always found very I didn't, I thought he was a creepy social climber, was my instinct. I engaged with him for a few minutes, and that was it, and that was the end of that. So he wasn't, considered this mighty figure, titan or something in American finance. And but at the same time, the more she reported, the more kind of alarming it became because of the people on those flight logs. I mean, when you find that Bill Clinton is on the flight log, that former Ambassador Bill Richardson is on the flight logs, that Ehud Barak, from Israeli former prime minister, was on the. Then you start thinking, oh my God, the guy is so hugely well connected, and it was puzzling. But I also know and I think it is true that the interesting thing about Epstein is the whole sort of melange around him. They were all kind of involved for different reasons in a funny way. I mean, they're the ones who were looking always for the sex and the girls, and the fact that he was such a kind of font of just satisfying people's most kind of insidious fantasies, really. And then there are the ones who are just trying to grift in the same way that he's trying to grift on them. He's trying to grift on everybody all the time for information, if not for money. And then there are people who are trying to grift on him. They want to ride on his private plane. They want him to get their kid into a fancy school. And there's the case, for instance, of Brad Karp, who was the erstwhile chairman of Paul Weiss, who says, can you get my son, into a film job like on Woody Allen's, so there were all these people who were just in this favor bank of this elite world that we all know very much is the way the world goes round. And they were all there for different reasons. But at the end of the day, they were all ignoring the elephant in the room that they had no business ignoring, because after we published those pieces, there was nothing you could say that was ambivalent about Jeffrey Epstein's conduct.
You were out in that world to some extent at that time. What did people say to you after you published?
Well, as I say, because he wasn't such a big figure, there were quite a lot of people who would say, that's a really interesting piece about that guy, Jeffrey Epstein. Wow. And it's like, I wonder what Clinton's involvement was. Actually, the main interest of the pieces was what was Clinton doing on that plane. And I can't remember why that didn't blow up more than it did. And probably a big news thing happened and people got distracted, as we know. I mean, there are stories all the time, and they're sort of riding along in that kind of slightly under that level of breaking through. And that's where it rode. It rode slightly under the level of kind of bursting out. And didn't get, I don't think, a great deal of TV coverage, which I think would have helped to have it break out. It didn't. It was just, people noted it who were in that world and in that swim and stuff, but it didn't have the same kind of boom that the series by Julie Brown in the Miami Herald had, because her piece, which was published many years later, happened at the time when Acosta, who was, of course, the Florida prosecutor that she was writing about, was then nominated for Trump's cabinet. So Acosta suddenly becomes a figure that people are looking at. And secondly, it was post Me Too, when I think, things did change after Me Too. I think that people were looking far more closely at the behavior of the rich and powerful. And so those two things kind of, Julie did a great job. I mean, she brought many more, additional great reporting to that whole story. So that's, I think, why it sort of stayed sort of swimming underneath the radar as it did.
One of the things about being pre-Me Too that jumps out of that 3-page letter, which on the subject of rich and powerful, was from Kirkland and Ellis, who are, well known as being one of the most powerful law firms, and was from Jay Lefkowitz, who had worked for George W. Bush before he then went to work for Kirkland and Ellis, became Jeffrey Epstein's defense attorney. But one of the things that he wrote to you was that jumps out was the willingness to attack the victims, to talk about them not being innocent, and that seems like language from another era now, but was obviously part of the way that this wall was put up around Epstein. Absolutely.
I mean, the whole idea was, again, it was sort of pre-Me Too, essentially. When after Me Too, people began to look at victims of sexual assault and underage girls in a different, far more sort of heated lens, if you like, a far more understanding lens. At that time, it was like, these girls, they were sort of semi-sex workers at this point, and some of them were sex workers, some of them weren't, but they all knew what they were doing. Well, I mean, it's insane to say that, because they were so young, they had no idea what they were doing. None. And of course, the most horrible thing about it was, and we didn't really get the Ghislaine story at that time. The Ghislaine story was a sort of a later development, which, those initial stories, it was all Epstein focused. But, the fact is that Ghislaine, you could argue that he wouldn't have wrapped it up to almost like the industrial level kind of pedophilia that he was doing without, the good offices of Ghislaine. Because it was Ghislaine's ability and willingness to kind of cruise around the high schools, spas, bars, all these things. And with her upper class, kind of cut class English accent, disarm the girls who felt not threatened by this attractive upper class woman saying, "Oh, come, do come over. I've got this marvelous friend who wants to give me," they weren't frightened by her. She wasn't some seedy guy in a truck. I mean, she was this very attractive upper class woman. And that was, in a sense, part of the horribleness of that whole dynamic, because Epstein could send her out, and she did it with such eagerness. I mean, she made this her mission to bring girls in. I had the late Ed Epstein, different Epstein, no relation, wonderful investigative journalist, told me that one night, because he was a friend of Ghislaine at that time, they used to have dinner with friends. They all went to dinner at Elio's restaurant in Manhattan, and they were all sort of a big group having dinner, and there was a bunch of young girls at the bar. They were sort of clearly sort of just about, maybe some of them even had fake driver's licenses, but, they were young, very young and very attractive. And they were all kind of gathered at the bar. And at one point during the dinner, Ghislaine kind of disappeared, and like Ed looked around like, where's Ghislaine gone? And he said to someone at the dinner, where's Ghislaine gone? He said, "Oh, she's over there by the bar. She's getting phone numbers for Jeffrey." So she was constantly, vacuuming any space she could find, getting these numbers, following up. I mean, she was demonically efficient, in his web. And that is why she deserved to sit and rot in that prison, because it was really but for Ghislaine, frankly. He would have found it much harder. I mean, he did depend on the sort of underground railroad of his horrible French modeling agent friend, who indeed also hanged himself in prison in Paris. A story, by the way, which I find endlessly interesting, because it hasn't really been investigated as to his death in exactly the same way in a Paris prison.
I should just say, by the way, that Conchita Sarnoff's original articles named Jean-Luc Brunel as Epstein's chief enabling companion.
He was. So aside from Ghislaine, he was the other way that he got a lot of girls, which was he would get them to come in to, quote, model for his modeling agency, and he had a lot of a lot of them coming in from Eastern Europe, Russian girls. It seems to be that, I mean, I think at that period in particular, sort of Russian and Eastern European girls were a big thing, in this whole story. Whether or not any of those Russian girls, will turn out to have been Russian assets, who knows? Because they certainly penetrated every aspect of society. I mean, we saw, in the Leon Black case recently that there was this, Eastern European woman who accused Leon Black of sexually assaulting her, and that became a massive case. He was also part of the Epstein network. So, I mean, it's all such a kind of scheme, knitted together that it's going to take really and I think it's going to take years to really unpick it all. And I mean, one of the difficulties that every one of these batches of emails and the people in them is kind of another piece of the plot, I mean, there's so many people involved that it's hard to track down the important ones.
So many of those plot lines are very hard to piece together and partial. And as I said, 3 million still unpublished, but we have clues and we have directions, and we don't know. Just use that example of the US Attorney's Office. We don't know what happened next. We don't know why they wanted to close it down. And maybe the answer is in the files. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's in the next set.
I know. Well, that's what's so fascinating about it. And of course, the frustration of it, because, if this had been a properly prosecuted case, where 2 years had been spent sort of organizing all of this evidence and these leads and chasing them down and prosecuting a live Jeffrey Epstein, we might have had much better route through it all, but at the moment we're just looking at the absolutely unfiltered product, which is the stuff of, major prosecution investigations. And you've got lawyers who pour through it and have those boards where they're sticking things up and the networks and who people are, and, but this is now being done kind of piecemeal in real time by every journalist who can get their hands on and has the time.
If it doesn't end up with a proper investigation, I think it's extremely damaging for the royal family. So they're kind of caught if they do and they're caught if they don't. Like, I was talking to friends of William and Charles last week, and William's friends were saying, when William becomes king, if this was happening under his watch, there'd be a proper investigation, a proper police investigation, and blah blah blah. He'd be down the station answering questions with PC Plod. And Charles's side was saying, it's really easy to say that when you're not actually the king, because it's like being an opposition politician going, I'm going to lower taxes and give you free childcare. But if you're actually king and Andrew comes into court and starts testifying, who knows what might happen. And then we saw this very other sinister development in the Sunday Times at the weekend, where Andrew was starting to be described as unstable by the palace. There's starting to be suggestions that he's suicidal. Some of it, some suspicious minds are suggesting, feels like a softening up exercise for him to be committed to a psychiatric hospital, which frankly would solve a lot of the royal family's problems.
And this is a slight, kind of back down into history, but that would not be the first time that the royal family or their relatives have found themselves committed to psychiatric hospitals to get them out of sight. It's a very bizarre feature of royal history.
Well, interestingly, where Andrew is living now, Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate, was, of course, famously the home of Prince John, who was this, mentally troubled.
Mentally disabled, and obviously, I should say Prince John, we're talking about the early 1900s here. We kind of understand, words were used at the time that we wouldn't use now. We think he was probably in some way mentally disabled, but
I think he had Down syndrome. Yeah, actually. So even by the standards today, obviously he would have been completely part of society. Yes. But in those days, it was keep him out of sight. And Prince John, and I believe he died very young. I think he died at the age of 12 or 13. So they don't have. But look, that's a long time ago. Obviously, look, if Andrew does get locked up in a mental asylum, it will be a extraordinary development. But there's definitely a feeling we've had these kind of reports that he's had his guns taken off him. The hint being that he could kill himself or somebody else. A la King Dipendra of Nepal, who famously murdered his entire family, who I actually went to school with.
I was about to say,
nice
they were all at Eton, I believe, Tom. So yes, that's the elite British school.
Yes.
The home, or not the home, but the school that's produced prime ministers and members of the royal family, including William and Harry, including the royalist Tom himself, and murdering Nepali royals.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, not since I was back in my dorm with Nanny tucking me in have I been so worried about the state of a British, the state of a member of the royal family and his love of firearms.
Yes.
But there's definitely
the reunions must be amazing.
Yeah. But there's definitely a attempt to paint Andrew now as mentally unstable.
So
and it's really notable,
Yeah.
and the language is really similar to what was used around Diana.
Yes.
Where Diana was painted as unstable, emotional, lashing out, suicidal, all this kind of stuff.
So the other big thing that's hanging over this for people in the United States is he going to tell the truth to Congress? Because all of this scandal has come out because of the actions of Congress, not the actions of Donald Trump. He was forced into signing the law that released the Epstein files, but the votes of members of Congress have forced open these 3 million files. And by the way, 3 million are unpublished. 3 million are being kept secret, so who knows what is hiding in there. But one of the key demands that Ro Khanna, who I mentioned, had exploded the files open and got redactions removed, which have already toppled this Sultan from the Emirates. But one of the demands that Ro Khanna has been making is that Andrew must come to Congress and tell the truth. Is that going to happen,
That's
Tom?
not going to happen in a million years. Andrew would never have legal advice telling him to do that. He's never going to come and voluntarily give evidence again. I mean, Andrew's now, admittedly, it's now harder to find people who will identify themselves as Andrew's friends. But before this most recent dump, when Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie were saying, he had to come to the US, people who knew Andrew said to me that he just felt that this was like them just jumping on the bandwagon. They knew he was never going to come. This was just them trying to aggrandize themselves, and they were literally saying, do you know what, maybe they need to focus on people in their own country, because let's be honest, Andrew has not yet faced any legal ramifications. It looks like those are coming, but he's faced a hell of a lot more than anyone in the United States. I mean, I can't even think of anybody in the United States even being fired from their job, barely.
Well,
so I think the idea, frankly,
I think we've had one casualty.
Thomas Massie and the US Congress to say how appalling it is that Andrew doesn't give evidence. Look, I'm not saying that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor shouldn't give evidence to US Congress. Of course he should. I'm just saying that it's never going to happen. And so I think that, frankly, what I want to see is Andrew face a criminal investigation in the United Kingdom. And that, I think, amazingly, actually could happen. And we could end up in a situation here where His Majesty's brother is at leisure in His Majesty's prison. And wouldn't that be an extraordinary turn of events to the British royal family?
Well, I think it's probably 500 or 600 years since one member of the royal family locked up another one. But one of the things that's kind of reverberating around this scandal, Tom, is that more and more details come out that paint a picture of extraordinary, I suppose, moral turpitude is one very highbrow way of putting it. We learned, for example, that Andrew appeared to circumvent security regulations at Buckingham Palace.
Yes. So a report in The Sun today saying that Andrew would call down to the gate when he had young women coming up using the phrase, "Mrs. Windsor will arrive shortly. Please let her in and show her up." Now, this isn't from the Epstein files, but it's obviously triggered by the revelations. And very interestingly, a character who I'm sure you'll remember from your days on the British tabloids, Paul Page, the notorious...
Everybody comes round again.
Every royal security story ends up with... So Paul Page was an enormously corrupt member of SA-19, the Royal Protection Squad, who was, all kinds of... I think in the end, there were drugs and there were women, and ultimately, I think it was a kind of pyramid scheme that he was running for other cops that finally brought him down. But he is a fascinating source, despite obviously being a compromised witness. He is a fascinating source of insight because he hates the royal family so much for what they did to him. And he actually has contacted Thames Valley Police just literally today. We're recording this on Friday, to say that he's very willing to cooperate and that he also saw all these women going up to Andrew with absolutely no checks. And to the extent that the joke in the palace was that Andrew should have a revolving door fitted to his bedroom.
And of course, Andrew Loney, who is a friend of this podcast and a regular guest, I should say, Tom, on your Royalist channel, revealed just the extraordinary scale of Andrew's sexual activities around the world. And one of the things that this comes back to, and I know you quite rightly say that it's very likely to be an Al Capone scenario of a prosecution, that it's about the money and about the secrets, that clearly Prince Andrew, when he was Prince Andrew, was known to be rich, he was known to be a womanizer, but now we have questions over the origin of that. We have no statement from Andrew about where those have come from. But the side of the sexual side of this is obviously a big part of this of the picture of what was happening, that raises this big question for the king. If the Buckingham Palace policeman knew that things were bad, how can the person at the top not know?
Yes, and of course that's exactly where I think inevitably this is going to end up, because these revelations are not going to stop coming. I imagine that pretty soon people are going to come forward. There's already a lot of suggestion in the UK newspapers that they know who a lot of these women are. They're just choosing not to name them. I imagine they are being phoned up on a regular basis and being asked if they want to break their anonymity and, potentially be the nail in the coffin.
The president was raging against you on Air Force One.
Me and the president.
Yeah, his line now about the Epstein files appears to be he's exonerated and you,
are the cause of all of his problems.
Yeah, you, sleazeback journalist Michael Wolff and Jeffrey Epstein were conspiring to bring him down. That's what he takes from the Epstein files.
Right, and this is not altogether untrue, by the way. It is certainly untrue that he's been exonerated. He's always exonerated.
Right. Nobody's been exonerated more. The great exoneration, terrific exoneration.
But it certainly was a piece of my relationship with Jeffrey Epstein was trying to get him to use what he knew to actually sound, at the very least, a warning against Donald Trump.
Right.
So he is right. He's picked up on that. He's kind of focused in on that. And when he focuses in on things, that is actually he has an antenna for what is true. In other words, so when he singles that out, he is saying, yeah, that could have been harmful to me.
Right.
And
I still think he thinks the Epstein files might be harmful to him.
And let's go into, because I want to do the Steve Bannon thing, because Steve Bannon has been an Epstein person of the day.
But before we do, I would just like to remark that I thought it was strange that the reporters on Air Force One, given that the news last week with your own legal case that Melania doesn't in fact live at the White House, she lives at Trump Tower, I thought it was odd that instead of asking them, where does Melania live, they asked instead, did you give Melania flowers for Valentine's Day? And weirdly, he didn't even say yes to that. He said, oh, it's complicated. What's complicated about it? He couldn't just say, no, because we don't live together. And why did no one say, is it true that Melania lives in Trump Tower? Instead, he looked sort of sheepish and weird and backed away.
Yeah, no, and that's the other thing why my name comes up. I am under his skin with this Melania lawsuit.
Well, we're inside his head,
I mean,
and you're
yeah.
under his skin.
I mean, this lawsuit is a problem for them. I mean, they screwed up to get themselves in a position where I could pursue them. They're not pursuing me; I'm pursuing them, and that this could ultimately end up with depositions taken certainly from their friends, and quite possibly, inevitably, actually, if it goes that far with them. So that's a screw up. The lawsuit, getting themselves in this position, is a screw up with my name on it.
But if I were a journalist on Air Force One and I had the opportunity to talk to Trump, I would be talking to him about this. Journalist, if you're out there and you're looking for things to ask about,
well, yeah, but
the
you know
suit
the
against
problem.
Melania is interesting.
Yeah, you know the problem. If you ask those kinds of questions, you won't be on the plane anymore.
Well, I'm sure that he will open the door mid-flight and kick them off.
Anyway, but I want to get back to this Bannon thing, and I want to connect it to this idea that he thinks that I was plotting with Epstein against him, because one of the people who Epstein was plotting with against Trump was with Bannon. But also let me recollect that moment when Jeffrey Epstein met Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon's first words to Jeffrey Epstein were,
I know what they were. Yeah. You were the only person I was afraid of during the 2016 campaign.
bingo.
Yeah. See, I have been listening. Yeah. So, and you introduced Steve Bannon to Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah. So the New York Times yesterday did their Bannon Epstein takedown. There's one a day now. So all they're able to do is just write stories with snippets from these emails, and they managed their coverage of the Bannon Epstein relationship was, it seemed like zero reporting, actually.
Well, I thought the coverage was exactly the same as the chapter you had written in your book, Too Famous, 5 years ago.
Yes. Okay. So 5 years ago, written everything you could want to know about the Epstein-Bannon relationship. 5 years ago, why now? And the other thing is that they missed a kind of a salient fact, which is that I was the person who introduced Epstein and Bannon, which is interesting because the New York Times takes any excuse to give me a poke. And they missed that one because nobody is doing any reporting.
Well, it was a very interesting chapter in your book when it came out, which was an anthology of pieces about sort of famous men, basically. And but what was interesting about it was you have the recordings of Steve Bannon trying to help Jeffrey Epstein prepare for a possible interview on 60 Minutes, and Bannon is putting him through his paces. And actually, we've seen some of this now.
Some of this
online.
has come out.
Yeah,
yes.
I watched some of it on Instagram and TikTok, so it's out there. But it is a really interesting insight into the two of them.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think it was a kind of fascinating relationship, and it was a relationship that I kind of watched unfold, and it goes. First thing it was. Bannon is now like everybody. No, I didn't really know him. No, I wasn't really friends.
Just place Bannon for us at this point. So this was 2017, right?
The fall of 2017.
So Bannon had been cast out by Donald Trump at this point?
Yes, he had been cast out in August. He was, he was considering his future, obviously looking to meet people who might help finance that future. But also kind of having a good time. I knew Bannon well at this point and had seen him, if not every day, very often through the first term, through that from January through to August, and the working in the White House for him had become an intolerable burden. I mean, working with Trump, who he hated, working with Jared, and everything was. So by the time he was pushed out of the White House, exiled from the White House, you could just see it, the weight come off his shoulder. So he was in a very good place. Not I've been banished, but like I've been saved. And so I introduced them to Epstein, and they immediately bonded over their hatred for Donald Trump. I mean, they both had this deep experience with him, and to this day, I think both Epstein and Trump, certainly in my rather substantial experience, are the two people who are most insightful about Donald Trump.
I mean, Bannon and Epstein
Yes.
are the people who are most insightful.
Yes.
Yep.
And they would get together constantly, and the overwhelming part of their conversation was about Donald Trump, trying to explain this, about trying to understand how this guy could have come to power, how this happened, and then anecdote after anecdote after anecdote about what a moron he is.
Do you think they were jealous of Trump?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think they each felt that they were smarter than Trump, because they both were smarter than Trump, and they each felt that he had played them in some way. And whatever Trump was, whatever Trump had become, it was partly because of them. So all of those kinds of things were operative. But I think the overriding thing was they felt, like much of the country felt, how
did this happen?
Possibly have happened? And they went on, because they knew him so well, to see this quite in comic terms, or comic tragic terms. So this became a kind of entertainment for them to go over this again and again and again and again. But the point is they really bonded. They really became incredibly good friends, on the phone all the time or in person all of the time.
And did Donald Trump know this? Did he know that the two people that he had at one point been close with were now bonded together? Because I would imagine that might make him paranoid.
Yes, and I imagine that he did know this, and it probably did make him paranoid. Yeah.
In the book,
I mean, there is a kind of thing, and it's an unanswered question. How aware was Donald Trump of this Epstein relationship closing in on him? Mm-hmm. There is the view of a number of people that when Epstein started to talk to me about Trump and I started to publish this, and I went back and forth with Epstein, and he said, yeah. I mean, I remember this very specifically, yes. And he thought about it. You tell that story about the breakup of the relationship, and Epstein's belief that it was Trump that
shopped him to the Palm Beach police.
Yes.
If they can rig the elections, the person Trump wants covering his butt is Pam Bondi, because she has completely debased herself, taken the entire Department of Justice, turned it into a Department of Obstruction of Justice and Retribution. And, in his book, that's a winner.
So, David, how seriously do you think we should take the various threats to the election in 2026, to the midterms? This
Very
thing that you go on. Just talk us through the points that are most concerning.
Well, the reality is that they realize they're going to lose, and so they're using every conceivable tool in order to put their thumb on the scale, right? So you had the raid in Fulton County to claim the voter rolls. This is part of a broader effort to get voter rolls, whether it's Pam Bondi saying to Governor Walz in Minneapolis, we'll leave if you give us the voter rolls, or some of the other cases where they're trying to get them. Why do they want the voter rolls? So they can disqualify people. Why do they want to pursue the conspiracy theories about Fulton County? So they can say, well, we need to impound these machines. There's a potential problem. And you will never see the votes again. You will never see what comes out of that. They are trying also, however, to win by gerrymandering. They're trying also to win by the SAVE Act, which has passed through the House and is now going to make its way to the Senate, which is an act that essentially says you need to have a federally issued piece of identification, which a lot of people don't have, in order to vote. And you know,
will that go through the Senate though? I mean, my understanding was it passed the House, but it won't get through the Senate.
There's some doubt that it'll get through the Senate, but what I'm saying is they're trying everything.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're trying gerrymandering, they're trying to claim voter rolls, they're trying to cast doubt on the elections. They are, you know, Trump repeatedly, why would he repeat about 2020 over and over again? It doesn't benefit him, except if he can say, these elections are rigged. They're not reliable. They want to undermine the reliability of the elections, which authoritarians do all the time. But
and just to sow confusion too, I think, right? So that you don't have to undermine an election by saying it's completely untrue. You can undermine an election by sowing enough doubt that people aren't sure.
Well, and then you can challenge the results in court, and you can not seat people who win in certain kinds of things. And then, of course, on top of all of this, you have them sending troops into the cities, and Steve Bannon saying, we're going to have troops around polling areas so that what they want, I mean, even him saying that is going to scare certain people from going, because they don't just arrest illegal immigrants. They arrest brown people. They arrest people who have accents and so forth. And you have Kristi Noem, we return to Kristi Noem again, saying a few days ago that they are going to make sure that only the right people get to vote in the elections.
Yeah.
And so, you know, what do I name? Just 6 different ways to get to this thing?
And you have the director of the intelligence services, Tulsi Gabbard, overseeing the raid in Georgia. And then you have this strange, and I wanted to ask you what you were hearing about this strange intelligence whistleblower that's been buried in the intelligence department that has suddenly surfaced, was supposed to have been shown to Congress, that wasn't, that appears to be fingering Jared Kushner.
Well, I mean, by fingering Jared Kushner, what he appears to be saying is that there is an intercept that the NSA heard between 2 foreign nationals that suggested that perhaps Jared Kushner was a source of influence for them, perhaps, and again, we don't know the details, acting outside of FARA, the act by which you have to register as a foreign agent. And, you know, there is some doubt about the credibility of all of that. The more worrisome thing with Tulsi Gabbard being in Fulton County is that all she has to do is evoke the idea of foreign meddling and say it's a national security issue, and then say, I can't tell you everything. It would reveal our sources and methods. And then say, therefore, we have to impound these voting machines. We have to investigate these people. We have to postpone this election, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is, it's belts and suspenders with them. They are using every available trick to try to win this thing. And of course, you know, Trump's been pretty explicit about why he's doing it, right? He has said he's doing it because he believes they will impeach him almost immediately. Yep. And guess what? They will.
And Steve Bannon has said if they don't win, he'll end up going to jail. Lots of them will go to jail.
And they should. You know, I think that, you know, one of the things that I find particularly interesting is, you know, Trump is accused of a lot of corruption and enriching himself and enriching his family in the course of this first year of the presidency to the tune of $5 billion, maybe more. We don't know because crypto is involved, and crypto could mean that it's billions and billions more than that. It's untraceable, and we will never know anything about it except that Trump became a big advocate for crypto as he came into office because, it's a way to conduct essentially criminal transactions. But here's the thing about all of that. Trump thinks he has immunity because the Supreme Court has said presidents acting on official acts have immunity. Well, being corrupt, forcing foreign governments to pay, shaking them down, that can't be an official act because it's explicitly barred by the Constitution in not one but two emoluments clauses. And so there will be an opportunity to prosecute Trump on that front. And frankly, I'm a little surprised people aren't making more of it because it's ugly and it's offensive. But it is also a real point of vulnerability, I think, for Trump.
Well, and as he's pointed out, if the Republicans don't get their act together, he'll be impeached, and that's why they need to do everything they can to sow anxiety and doubt around the elections. It's an extraordinary turn of events, really. Perhaps it could have been predicted, but here we are. So, David, let's have some hopium in the conversation in terms of you handicapping the leaders that you think the Democrats might put forward that might lead us to a better place.
Well, first of all, any leader would lead us to a better place. I have a dog. He's a rescue. He's a mutt. He's part Great Pyrenees. He's part,
I'm voting for your dog. I'm voting for your dog.
Exactly. Anybody would vote for my dog. Grizzly for president. Grizzly would be an excellent president compared to Trump, right? So that's, if there are free and fair elections, or even, and I think this is the best we can hope for, moderately free and moderately fair elections, then you could get a change in leadership of the United States, which, the world, we just had the Munich Security Conference last week. The world is desperate for a change in leadership of the United States. The problem is it's 3 years out. Mm-hmm. And, we're already starting to see people, Gavin Newsom is out there, and he went to Davos, and he went to the Munich Security Conference, and he's writing books, and he's doing podcasts, and he's like full on campaigning. And I know for a fact he's hiring people. Friends of mine have been called by the Newsom campaign and said, will you work with us? They've also, by the way, been asked or told, if you work with us, you can't work with any other campaigns, which I think is, it's a little premature for that. But, Gavin Newsom is out there 3 years ahead of this. Now,
well, AOC, the Congresswoman, was also out in Munich.
Let me get to her in a second. But my point, beginning with Gavin Newsom, is it almost assuredly means, being the front runner 3 years out, that you will not be the candidate. Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, 3 years out, they were not going to be the candidate. They were not leading the field. Democrats, are strange that way, but also American politics moves in certain ways, and the zeitgeist changes, and you need somebody who's going to speak to that, particularly given the fact that we're in a very social media driven environment. So I think Gavin Newsom, who's currently the front runner, there's some real questions about whether he can maintain that status. Now, was AOC in Munich to burnish her potential presidential prospects? I don't know, maybe. AOC's 36 years old. She's only been eligible to run for president for a year. She's only been in Congress for a few terms. The fact that she was there, I think, is the beginning of her foreign policy and national security education, not her effort to deliver a finished product and move to the front of the field. Will she be important in the election as a progressive leader? Yes. Might she be a candidate? Might somebody be saying you can be the Mamdani? Maybe. But I wouldn't. I think she's going to be a big figure in American politics for the next 20 years.
Trump is, will he, won't he send in troops or bombing missions to Iran? And does he want regime change?
I think he's got himself in somewhat of a serious pickle here. If he doesn't go at this point, he kind of really looks weak, and he already looks like he's already backpedaled this quite a bit. Remember, he invited all of those protesters into the street under the banner, basically, of his protection.
Right, help is on the way, is what he Truth Social.
Help is on the way. Warnings to the Iranian regime: if you attack the protesters, you will have to answer to Donald Trump. Then, of course, they did attack the protesters at a level beyond anyone's imagination. And Trump did, what did he do? Nothing. So he's there, he's up against that. He was explicit on this point, and then he didn't do it. And all of those people died.
Yeah, I think we've got between 6,000 and 8,000 people were shot dead.
Seriously, under his watch, they died. So here he is now. Now he could back off again. But what does that make him look like? Or he can go forward. But the problem of going forward, which is why he didn't go forward the first time, is that it's very complicated. Iran is a big country, is a formidable military power, even degraded as it has been in our previous attacks and in Israel's attacks. But nevertheless, when people in the White House always talk about his reluctance to go to war, and this is sort of as a good thing. It's been portrayed. He's not going to go to war because it's too complicated for him. He doesn't like to listen to generals. All of the generals are kind of McKinsey trained guys. He hates that. It's boring to him. It's PowerPoint. And he doesn't like to be confronted with information. War is an information heavy activity, to say the very least.
Well, and he's not well supported by Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense / War.
No, but the general, there are a lot of obviously competent generals in the United States chain of command who are there, and they're on the line. If failure will be blamed on them, plus they know the people who are being put in harm's way. This is their job. And so they take their job very seriously, and they take their job of informing the president of all of the variables here. In other words, the risks, because this is kind of a blame situation. The commander in chief has to make the ultimate decision, and the ultimate blame is on him. So they rush, and I've witnessed some of these meetings, and they are thorough. They give you vastly more information than anybody would want, and Donald Trump wants no information. So it's a difficult moment for him to go forward in attacking Iran on a pretty massive scale. I think is the implication here.
But it's also not what the MAGA base want. This is the last thing they want. They don't know where Iran is, like the president. They can barely find it on a map. This is not what he ran on. And it's really is he doing this again? We've asked this before, but is this a wag the dog policy to get away from what happened in Minneapolis, to get away from the nonsense that didn't play well of Greenland, to get away from Venezuela that everybody's forgotten about, to get away from the economy?
No, I think that is a fast bombing attack. Yeah, you could say that, but it builds up like this. I think he's caught in the middle of this. He can't back down because then he's going to look weak. He doesn't want to go forward because it's so complicated.
Couldn't he back down by saying we threatened it, they backed down? This is another, war, potential war I've resolved.
Yes, I mean, I think that he will look for something like that. But this is pretty weak, and it's pretty transparent, as it was this time. I mean, the Iranians are, they really don't cooperate. So that they might do something and then they go back to doing the same thing that they've said they wouldn't do, and including shooting people all over the place. So I mean, I think it's difficult at this point to say, oh yeah, we've sat down with the Iranians and we have an understanding. I love them. I mean, Trump would come out and, I mean, as he did with the North Koreans, we're love the guy. I don't think that can happen in this situation. And I think it's going to be very difficult for Trump to come out with a credible result here and say, we went eye to eye, the Iranians blinked, and this is what we've gotten. I mean, listen, he says whatever he wants to say. And if he does not really want to go forward, he will say something like that. But I think it's going to be a difficult sell.
Well, it's doubly ironic that he's meeting with his Board of Peace. And perhaps more importantly, we should point out who's not at the Board of Peace or who hasn't sent high-up representatives. The UK hasn't, France hasn't, Germany hasn't, Sweden hasn't, Norway hasn't. In fact, the countries that he wants to be there aren't there. And as you say, he's got the shithole.
Yes, and countries. All of those countries, which are all of them the mainstay Western European nations, are now, I don't know, pretty much they're being converted very quickly into our enemy.
Well, I don't know if they're our enemy, but they are viewing America with much more skepticism than they did. They know they can no longer rely on it, and they're not going to pay the money. They don't want to be fleeced by Trump.
I think the antagonism is mounting up almost on a daily basis. And, whereas the antagonism before would have been at Russia or China, or the Iranian, whatever that standard view of the world in which the Western European nations were our allies in everything, in history and in the world order, has so vastly changed over, just in the course of this past year. It's come tumbling down.
Well, as Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, said, there's been a rupture in the global order.
And then this goes on again, and this is now come up with with Trump's threats to break the treaty, the North American treaty, which exists between Mexico, the U.S., and Canada. So essentially, the people who he is arguably most antagonistic to are the Canadians. How that has come about, I mean, that's.
Well, I think because he's probably jealous of Mark Carney, right? Mark Carney is everything Trump wanted to be and isn't.
I mean, I think that there's a whole range of things, including this idea that Canada should be part of the U.S., which is logged in his brain in a serious brain-wormy way. And I'm not sure that he can get out. I mean, it is, he looks at a map and says, and people in the White House describe this with, I would read their attitude as, clear-eyed. That he looks at a map and sees Canada is connected to the United States, this long border that we share. Mm-hmm. I mean, he has this obsession about borders, and he may not know anything else on a map, which he does not know, which he doesn't. But he does see, here's the United States, and here's Canada, and we all speak English, or mostly, and why aren't we together?
There's a certain logic to that. Why aren't we together, except that it's a completely different country?
Yes. So there is no logic to it, except the logic of looking at a map and not understanding what you're seeing on the map.
Exactly. All right. Now, most importantly, we've got lots of comments about my Melania bucket. Some people don't realise that it's ironic. A few people said it was outrageous, I needed to get rid of it immediately. Some other people jumped in and said, no, it's ironic. But I do need suggestions of what to do with it. The Melania bucket, this was the $12.99.
Did you get popcorn in there?
I got popcorn in here, which I immediately poured out because it looked suspect. But this is the $12.99 Melania bucket of popcorn that I'm assuming she got 70% of the back end. There's a picture of her here. But I'm up for interesting ideas. I think we could do something interesting with it. So I'm just
I think so. I think we should
reaching out to people.
We could solicit all kinds of ideas for the Melania Merchandise Company, which is shortly being rolled out.
Fresh headlines are once again shaking the global stage, from political drama in Washington to royal controversy in London, and the lingering shadow of Jeffrey Epstein's network. In the United States, fresh chaos continues to surround Donald Trump as legal battles, campaign tensions, and nonstop media scrutiny fuel a storm that shows no signs of slowing down. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the British royal family is facing renewed attention over past associations tied to Prince Andrew, keeping royal reputations under intense public debate. But perhaps the most unsettling thread connecting these stories is the continued effort to uncover the full extent of Jeffrey Epstein's influence. Court filings, testimonies, and investigative reporting are gradually revealing how power, wealth, and secrecy intersected for years. As new details emerge, one thing is clear: these stories aren't fading away. Instead, they're evolving, raising deeper questions about accountability, privilege, and the truth still waiting to surface.